In a far kingdom, beyond blue mountains and dark forests, there lived an old king. He was wise and kind of heart, and the people loved him like their own father. But one day a strange ailment settled in the royal chambers. The king had neither fever nor pain. Merely a deep, groundless melancholy took possession of his soul. He stopped smiling, stopped going out to the people, and a shadow lay upon his heart like an autumn mist upon a blooming meadow. The king had an only daughter, a beautiful princess, the light of his eyes, the joy of his life. And there was no greater sorrow for her than seeing her beloved father fade away. Even her gentle laughter could no longer break through this gray, cold gloom. And she was ready to do anything, just to return the smile to her father's face. The best healers from all over the kingdom were summoned to the palace. But no matter how much they labored over their potions and infusions, nothing helped. One by one, they threw up their hands and walked away, hanging their heads. And when the last hope seemed to have faded, the old royal stargazer appeared in the throne room. The one who had spent many days over ancient books in the highest tower of the castle. "This is not a sickness of the body," he spoke quietly, "but a sickness of the spirit. And only the touch of a miracle can heal it." And he told an ancient legend. Far, far away, at the very edge of the world, on an island in the middle of the Red Sea, lives the all-knowing Griffin bird. A single feather from its golden tail, if it touches the king's brow, is capable of returning the joy of life to him. Thus the cure was found not in the vials of apothecaries, but on the dusty pages of a forgotten book. And the path to it lay not to a neighboring city, but to the very edge of the world. Hearing the stargazer's words, the king rose from his bed, gathering his last strength. His eyes, clouded with melancholy, flashed for a moment with a spark of hope. And he commanded heralds to be summoned from all ends of the kingdom. On that same day, the royal will spread through cities and villages, along roads and paths. "Listen, good people. That brave hero who journeys to the very edge of the world and obtains a feather from the golden tail of the all-knowing griffin bird shall receive as a wife the king's only daughter, the beautiful princess, and shall become heir to the entire kingdom." And these words, weak but full of hope, flew around the world like birds in spring. The personal sorrow of the old king turned into a great challenge for all brave hearts. And the kingdom froze in anticipation. Who would answer this call? Who would dare to journey to where, perhaps, there is no return? News of the royal decree flew around the world faster than the wind, and dozens of brave knights and noble princes responded to it, thirsting for glory and the hand of the beautiful princess. One by one they set out on the road, clanking with armor and confidence. But the path to the edge of the world proved more terrible than any of them could have imagined. Some perished in boundless, scorching deserts. Others found their end in the stormy waters of unknown seas. Others wandered for months and returned home with emptiness in their hands and shame in their hearts. No one, not a single brave man, could even get close to the mysterious island where the all-knowing griffin bird dwelt. Months went by, and the king grew ever weaker. And with every hero who returned with nothing, hope in the kingdom faded like a candle in a cold wind. And at that time, in a distant village at the very edge of the kingdom, lived a young fellow named Hans. He was neither a prince nor a knight, only the son of a poor peasant. He had neither rich clothes, nor a war horse, nor a ringing sword. But Hans had something more valuable: a kind heart, a sharp mind, and a cheerful, unyielding character. Rumor reached his village about the sick king, the miraculous feather, and the great reward. Hans fell into thought, and where princes in silks and knights in shining armor had retreated, a simple fellow in a canvas shirt decided to take a step forward, one whose heart was richer than any royal treasury. Hans sat for a long time on the threshold of his hut, looking at the sunset. And his thoughts were not of gold, and not of a crown. "The edge of the world," he whispered to himself. "The Red Sea, a mysterious island, a magic bird. Is it possible to hear of such things and stay home? Is it possible not to try?" But there was something else that gave him no peace. Before his eyes stood the image of the old king, fading from an unknown melancholy, and his daughter, whose heart was breaking with grief. And Hans felt a pang in his chest. What is the use of sitting on the stove, he finally decided, when someone out there, far away, is waiting for help? Others went for the crown and wealth, but Hans for the horizon. He was beckoned by the road itself and the hope of doing a good deed for those in trouble. And with the first rays of the sun, he would set out on his journey. At dawn, Hans came to say goodbye to his old parents. His mother wept, wiping tears with the hem of her apron. His father frowned, hiding anxiety in his gray mustache. But both blessed their son for the long journey, for they knew one cannot hold back him who has heard the call of the road. Hans's preparations were simple and brief. He asked for neither armor, nor sword, nor war horse. He took only a sturdy travel staff, a bag with a crust of black bread and a piece of sheep cheese, and a flask of clear spring water. He put on his sturdiest shoes, the ones that could still walk 100 miles. And Hans went out beyond the outskirts, setting off on a great feat on foot, equipped not as a warrior, but as a simple wanderer. His main armor was a kind heart, and his main weapon, strong legs and an unyielding spirit. Long and difficult was the path. Hans walked to the east, to where the sun is born, for so the ancient legends of the edge of the world said. He asked everyone he met about the mysterious Griffin bird, but most often he heard only mockery in response. Many knights on good horses did not make it. Where will you go on foot? Peasants and merchants laughed. Go home, you fool. But Hans did not lose heart. He walked through mockery and mistrust, and his faith was the only map in this long wandering. And then one day, at a crossroads of 7 roads, he met an old pilgrim, a grey-haired wanderer who had seen the whole wide world. He looked at Hans with a long gaze, saw in his eyes not madness, but persistence, and spoke quietly. "Go all the time to the east, lad. Do not turn anywhere. The road itself will lead you." And with new hope in his heart, Hans continued his journey. After many days of travel, Hans came to a rich trading city. Tall houses, wide streets, shops full of goods. Everything spoke of past prosperity. But to the traveler's surprise, the residents walked about dejected, with sorrow on their faces, as if a shadow lay upon this place. On the main square, Hans saw a magnificent marble fountain, decorated with beautiful sculptures. But its bowl was dry as desert sand. "Before," sighed the gray-haired burgomaster, "not water flowed from this fountain, but the best wine, bringing joy and merriment to all. But a year ago it ran dry, and since then melancholy has settled in our hearts." Learning that Hans was making his way to the all-knowing Griffin bird, the burgomaster implored, "Ask him, good traveler, why our fountain has run dry, and how to bring it back to life." "I promise," answered Hans. Thus into his bag, where lay only bread, he put the first stranger's trouble, promising to carry it to the very edge of the world. Hans walked further, and the path led him to other lands. One day, he saw a beautiful garden behind a stone fence, but at its gate sat an old gardener and wept bitterly, dropping his head into his hands. In the very heart of the garden rose a mighty apple tree, but there was not a single leaf on it. Only bare, blackened branches reached to the sky, like hands begging for help. "Ah, good traveler," said the gardener through tears, "before, not simple apples grew on this tree, but fruits of pure gold. But a year ago, the apple tree ceased to bloom and began to wither, and no one knows why." Learning that Hans was making his way to the all-knowing Griffin bird, the old man implored, "Ask him why my tree is dying, and how to return its former strength." And Hans took upon himself this sorrow, the sorrow of a tree that had forgotten how to bear gold, and of a gardener who had forgotten how to smile. Whether Hans walked much or little, finally his path ran into a wide, stormy river. There was neither bridge nor ford across it, and the waters rushed so swiftly that it seemed no one could cross to the other bank. But then Hans saw a wondrous sight. In the middle of the river, waist deep in icy water, stood a huge giant. On his mighty back he carried travelers from bank to bank like a living fairy. His face, furrowed with deep wrinkles, was full of such weariness and sorrow that Hans felt a pang in his heart. When the giant carried him to the other bank, Hans asked, "Why do you bear this heavy service, good giant?" "It is my curse," he sighed with a voice like distant thunder. "For centuries I have stood in this water and know no peace. You are going to the all-knowing Griffin. I beg you, ask him, is there deliverance for me?" and Hans hoisted onto his shoulders the third, heaviest burden, the centuries-old weariness of the cursed giant. Having crossed the river, Hans stepped onto land where the foot of man had not yet trod. Here the world of people ended. Before him stretched a boundless, deserted coast, and beyond it, the crimson waters of the Red Sea, over which the sun did not rise. Only an eternal sunset glowed on the horizon, painting the sky and waves in the colors of smoldering coals. The air was thick and salty, and a strange silence reigned over this place, a silence that exists only where reality ends and legend begins. In the distance, amidst the crimson waters, loomed a lonely rocky island. On its very summit, Hans made out a large, secluded house, looking like the nest of a gigantic bird. His heart beat faster. He had reached that line where land yields to the sea, and sunset is never replaced by sunrise. His long wandering was almost over. On the shore, Hans found an old, dried-out boat, likely forgotten by some daredevil who had been here before him. Somehow patching it up, he crossed the crimson waters to the rocky island. Climbing the stony path to the very summit, he froze in amazement. Instead of a gloomy cave strewn with bones, before him stood an ordinary, sturdy house. Large, well-built, with a garden and a vegetable patch. Peaceful smoke curled from the chimney. Laundry dried on a line in the yard, and a red hen dozed by the porch. This frightening ordinariness made Hans's heart clench tighter than any monster would. He expected to see a fortress of horror, but found a peasant homestead, and he did not know what to expect now. Gathering his courage, he approached the door and knocked 3 times, as befits an honest traveler. The door opened with a quiet creak, and Hans involuntarily stepped back a pace. On the threshold stood the mistress of the house, the Griffin's wife. She was a huge giantess, as tall as a young oak. Her head almost touched the door lintel, and her hands were as broad as a miller's shovels. But her eyes turned out to be kind and tired, and her palms, work-worn, calloused, like those of a simple village woman who had spent her whole life in honest work. Seeing a living person on the threshold, she threw up her hands and gasped, "Good heavens! How did you get here, son? After all, people do not reach this place." There was not a drop of threat in her voice, only genuine surprise and maternal sympathy. Hans had prepared for battle, but met care. Before him stood not a monster, but only a very big and very lonely woman. The giantess stepped aside and invited him to enter. Inside, the house proved clean and cozy, like a simple peasant hut. Only everything here was of gigantic proportions. Tables, chairs, dishes, everything for a giant. The mistress seated Hans on a bench, placed before him a mug of fresh milk and a slice of fresh bread. And looking into her kind, tired eyes, Hans decided not to be cunning. He told her everything, without hiding anything, as if at confession, about the sick king, whose soul was fettered by groundless melancholy, about the long journey to the edge of the world, about the coveted feather from the golden tail of her husband, which alone is capable of healing the sovereign. And then he told of the 3 strangers' troubles that he had taken upon himself on the road, about the dried-up wine fountain, about the withered golden apple tree, and about the cursed giant who carries his heavy burden for centuries. He simply laid out before her his whole honest truth, and this turned out to be the truest of all strategies. The giantess listened silently, propping her cheek on her huge palm. When Hans finished, she looked at him for a long time, and tears glistened in her eyes. "You have a brave heart, son," she said finally, "and an honest one. Such are rarely met these days." But immediately her face became serious. "Only your business is dangerous. My husband, the Griffin, though all-knowing, has a stern temper. If he sees you, he might eat you without sorting out who you are and why you came." She fell silent, thinking something over, and then smiled slyly. "But since you have made such a journey and undertaken to help so many people, it would be a sin not to help you out. Listen to me carefully. Soon the Griffin will return home. Hide quickly under his bed and sit there quietly as a mouse. And at night, when he falls asleep, I will find out everything for you." Thus the wife of the mighty Griffin became Hans's secret ally, and the monster's lair turned into the most reliable of shelters. Hans had barely managed to scurry under the huge bed when suddenly the sky outside the window darkened. A terrible wind rose, making the walls groan and the window panes rattle. The house shook to its very foundation. And then, with a deafening whistle and crash, the door flew open, and the master burst into the room, the all-knowing Griffin bird. It was a mighty, ancient creature, the body of a gigantic lion covered in golden fur, and the wings of a giant eagle, every feather of which shone like molten gold. His claws were sharp as Turkish sabers, his beak curved like a steel hook, and his eyes burned with a piercing, all-seeing fire from which not a single secret could be hidden. The Griffin landed in the middle of the room, and the floor creaked plaintively beneath him. Hans lay under the bed, not daring to breathe. He felt like a little mouse hiding from a storm in the lair of the lion himself. The Griffin sat at the table, but did not touch the food. Instead, he raised his mighty head and swept his eagle beak through the air, sniffing. And suddenly, his thunderous voice shook the walls. "Foo, foo, foo! It smells of human spirit. Wife, I smell it. A human is hiding here." He rose, and the floor groaned under his paws. Slowly, step by step, the Griffin began to walk around the room, sniffing every corner, every crack. His golden eyes sparkled like two small suns. Hans lay under the bed, not daring to breathe. His heart pounded so loudly that it seemed its beating was echoing throughout the house. His palms were sweaty, his throat dry. He was already mentally saying goodbye to life, ready for sharp claws to drag him out of his hiding place at any moment. The Griffin came closer and closer. Another step, and another. And then the huge paws stopped right at the edge of the bed. Every step of the monster was for Hans like the blow of a hammer on the anvil of his heart, frozen in terror. At the very moment when the Griffin had already leaned down to look under the bed, his wife calmly and authoritatively called out, "What are you making up, old man? You are imagining things." She imperturbably placed before him a huge steaming bowl of stew, from which came such an aroma that Hans's own stomach grumbled. "Today a squad of royal soldiers flew past our island," continued the giantess, stirring the brew. "That is why their scent still floats in the air. You are always imagining things out of nowhere. Better sit down to supper before it gets cold. You are hungry after a long flight." The Griffin grumbled discontentedly, still moving his beak through the air. But the smell of hot food proved stronger than suspicions. He reluctantly moved away from the bed and sat at the table. Thus, a simple bowl of stew and a calm word from his wife proved stronger than animal instinct, and hunger defeated suspicion. Danger had passed, for now. The Griffin ate supper for a long time, noisily emptying bowl after bowl. Then he moved away from the table, sat by the blazing hearth, and began to clean his golden feathers, clicking his mighty beak. And Hans lay under the bed, daring neither to sigh nor to move. He heard every sound, how the chair creaked under the master's weight, how the firewood crackled in the fire, how the feathers rustled under the steel beak. His arms went numb, his back ached, but he endured. For the Griffin, ordinary evening hours flowed by, but for Hans under the bed stretched a whole eternity, woven of fear and waiting. Only one hope warmed him. Sooner or later, the mighty Griffin would go to sleep, and then his hour would come. Finally, the Griffin, having eaten his fill and warmed himself by the hearth, yawned with all his huge maw. His yawn was like a gust of wind. "Time to sleep," he grumbled, and with a heavy crash collapsed onto his gigantic bed. Hans hid himself, pressing into the floor. Above him, boards creaked under the monstrous weight. Several agonizing minutes passed, and then the house shook from a mighty snore, similar to peals of distant thunder. The walls trembled, dishes jingled on the shelves. The Griffin fell asleep. Then his wife quietly leaned down to the bed and gave Hans a barely noticeable sign with her hand. The time had come. The monster's mighty snoring became for Hans not just a sound, but a signal to action. the quietest and most daring in his life. Hans waited until the snoring became steady and deep, like the sound of the surf. Then he carefully, slower than a snail crawls, climbed out from under the bed. His heart pounded at his very throat, but his hands were steady. On tiptoes, barely touching the floor, he sneaked up to the foot of the huge bed. There, hanging down almost to the very floor, lay the griffin's tail. Magnificent, like that of a bird of paradise, studded with long feathers that shone with pure gold even in the semi-darkness. A soft, warm glow emanated from them. Hans understood. He would have only one attempt. One, and no second one. He selected with his eyes the 3 most beautiful feathers, long, shining, perfect. He reached out a trembling hand. His fingers froze a hair's breadth from the target. He stood 1 step away from his dream and 1 breath away from death. His whole fate depended on how soundly the monster slept. Hans shut his eyes tight, gathered all his courage, and yanked. Hans yanked, and the first feather was in his hand. Without delaying a moment, he pulled out the second, and following that, the third. 3 lightning-fast jerks, and 3 shining golden feathers, warm and weightless, lay in his palm. But at that same moment, the griffin jumped up from the bed with a deafening, furious roar. The whole house shuddered. Dust showered from the ceiling. "What is it? Who is here?" he roared so that the walls trembled. His eyes flashed with fire. Claws scraped on the floor. Hans dived back under the bed faster than a drop of rain falls. He pressed into the floor, clutching the precious loot to his chest, not daring to breathe. His heart thundered in his ribs like a mad drum. 3 jerks, quick as a lightning strike, brought him victory. But these same jerks awakened a fury from which there was now no escape. Only the darkness under the bed and hope for a miracle. The griffin rushed about the room in fury, knocking over furniture and shaking the walls. His eyes blazed. Claws scraped the floor, leaving deep furrows. But here his wife yawned sweetly, stretched, and grumbled in a sleepy voice. "Why are you shouting, old man? You do not let me sleep in the middle of the night." She sat up on the bed, rubbing her eyes. "I had a bad dream, as if a cunning fox climbed into our chicken coop and wanted to steal the best geese. I got so angry at him in my dream that I probably pulled you by the tail. Forgive me. Do not be angry. Lie down and sleep." The griffin grumbled distrustfully, shook his head, sniffed the air. But his wife looked at him so calmly and innocently that his suspicions melted away. "A fox, then," he grunted, and grumbling, lay down on the bed again. Thus simple female cunning and an invented dream about a fox proved stronger than the fury of the all-knowing griffin. And Hans lay under the bed, clutching 3 golden feathers, saved for the second time. A little time passed, and the griffin's snoring thundered through the house again. Then his wife set to work. She tossed on the bed and began to wail loudly, as if talking in her sleep. "Oh, what a strange dream I am dreaming. As if I am in a distant city. And there on the main square stands a beautiful fountain. Before, sweet wine flowed from it, but now it has dried up completely. And all the people walk around sad, and no one knows what to do." She nudged her husband in the side and asked in a sleepy, plaintive voice, "Old man, hey old man, you know everything in the world. Do you not know why such a thing could happen?" The Griffin grumbled, awakened, but did not open his eyes, and hands under the bed pricked up his ears, not missing a single word. The Griffin's wife turned her bedroom into a theatre, and the feigned dream into a stage. And her words, intended for the ears under the bed, sounded to her husband only like incoherent night mutterings. The Griffin tossed discontentedly, awakened by his wife's nudge. Without opening his eyes, he muttered through his sleep, "What a wonder! Stupid little people. They cannot guess such a trifle themselves." He yawned and grumbled. Sitting in that fountain, under the main stone, is an old, vile toad. Many years ago she settled there and drinks all the wine. One needs only to lift the stone and chase the toad away, and the wine will flow like a river again as before. Having said this, the Griffin turned onto his other side, and a moment later his mighty snore shook the walls again. And hands under the bed listened, holding his breath, and memorized every word. Thus, muttering in his sleep, the all-knowing Griffin, without knowing it himself, gave a simple fellow the key to saving a whole city. Waiting a little, the Griffin's wife tossed again and wailed, "Oh, what a night! What dreams! There is no peace." She sighed loudly and plaintively. "Now I dream of a beautiful garden, and in it a mighty apple tree. Before apples of pure gold grew on it, but now it has all dried up, and not a single leaf on the branches. What happened to it, old man?" She nudged her husband in the side, not letting him fall into deep sleep. "And next," she continued immediately, "I dream of a wide, stormy river. In the middle of it stands a poor, tired giant, and eternally carries people on his back from bank to bank. He cannot leave, he cannot rest. What a bitter fate he has! Why does he suffer so?" She wove a web of invented dreams, and into this web, like a sleepy fly, her all-knowing but completely trusting husband obediently fell. And Hans under the bed caught every word. The Griffin grumbled angrily, annoyed that he was being woken again. "Stupid dreams you are dreaming, wife," he grumbled, not opening his eyes. "It is simpler than simple." He rolled onto his back and grunted. "Under that apple tree, at the very roots, a little mouse has settled. It gnaws the roots day and night. One needs only to find this mouse and chase it away, and the apple tree will bloom again and bear golden fruit." And the giant ferryman is a complete fool, he continued irritably. He needs only, when he is carrying the next traveler, to give him his pole, and then the traveler will become the ferryman instead of him, and the giant free. Having said this, the Griffin angrily turned to the wall and snored until the very morning. And Hans lay under the bed, soaking up every word. The grumbling of the sleepy monster became for him a treasure map, where the paths to salvation were marked for all who asked him for help. At dawn, when the first rays of the sun touched the crimson waters, and the Griffin was still fast asleep, his wife quietly leaned down to the bed. "Time, son," she whispered, helping Hans get out of the shelter. She shoved fresh bread and cheese into his bag for the road, and then let him out through the back door, pointing out the path to the shore. "Go in peace," whispered the giantess. "You received everything you came for. May luck accompany you." Hans bowed low to his savior, finding no words for gratitude, and he left the monster's house as quietly as he entered. But now he carried away with him not fear, but 3 golden feathers and 3 priceless secrets. Soon Hans reached the wide, stormy river. The tired giant ferryman was already waiting for him on the bank, and his eyes were full of hope. "Well, good traveler?" he asked in a trembling voice. "Did you learn my fate?" "I learned it," answered Hans with a smile. "Take me to the other bank, and I will reveal everything to you." The giant carefully carried him across the river. When Hans was already stepping onto land, he held out his travel staff to the giant. "Here, take this. Hold it." The giant mechanically took the staff, and at that same moment froze. Invisible chains that had fettered him for centuries fell away with a ring. He understood everything. With a joyful cry, such as these shores had not heard for centuries, the giant threw the staff to the first traveler he met and rushed away, finally free. Thus a simple travel staff became the key to freedom for one and shackles for another. A centuries-old curse was broken by one little trick. Hans's path lay past the familiar garden. The old gardener was still sitting at the gate, hanging his gray head. "Good news I bring you," exclaimed Hans. "I know why your apple tree is drying up." And he told the secret heard from the Griffin. The gardener immediately grabbed a spade and began to dig up the roots of the tree. And true enough, under the largest root lurked a little gray mouse that gnawed the wood day and night. The old man chased it away. And then a miracle happened. Before the astonished Hans's eyes, the dry, blackened branches were covered with young green foliage. Then they burst into white bloom, and a moment later grew heavy with shining golden apples. The gardener wept with happiness. In gratitude, he poured Hans a full sack of pure gold, as much as he could carry. Finally, Hans entered the gates of the rich trading city. On the main square, the beautiful but dead fountain still towered, and the faces of the townspeople were just as sad. "Good people," exclaimed Hans, "I have brought you the solution to your trouble." And he told the burgomaster the secret of the all-knowing Griffin. Immediately, workers took up crowbars and lifted the main stone at the base of the fountain. And there, in the murky, stagnant water, sat a huge, ugly toad. Black, slimy, with eyes full of ancient malice. She was driven away, and at that same moment, a powerful jet of pure, fragrant wine struck from the fountain. It sparkled in the sun like liquid ruby. The square exploded with shouts of joy. People hugged, laughed, wept with happiness. A great feast began in the city, and the grateful townspeople presented Hans with 2 sacks full of gold. Thus, having driven out one little ugly creature, he returned lost joy to a whole city. And so Hans, laden with gold and glory, turned toward his native kingdom. But now he was no longer that poor foot wanderer in a canvas shirt who had once walked out beyond the outskirts of his village. At the very first large market, he bought himself the best black horse, rich clothes of velvet and silk, and boots of soft leather. And when he rode into the gates of the royal palace, no one, neither the guards, nor the servants, nor the courtiers themselves, recognized in this stately rider the simple peasant son. "What a noble overseas prince has come to visit us," they whispered around him. The old king himself, still languishing from his melancholy, ordered the guest to be received with honors. Hans left this palace a beggar and returned a prince. And his wealth, earned not by the sword but by a kind heart, shone brighter than any crown. Hans entered the throne room. On the throne sat the king, pale, drooping, shrouded in the gray veil of his endless melancholy. "Sire," spoke Hans, bending his knee, "I am that very simple fellow who a year ago went to the edge of the world by your decree. I have fulfilled my promise." With these words he took 3 shining golden feathers from his bosom. They illuminated the throne room with soft, warm light. Hans approached the king and, as the ancient legend said, carefully touched his brow with the tip of a feather. And a miracle happened. The gray veil fell from the royal eyes like morning mist under the rays of the sun. Wrinkles of sorrow smoothed out, shoulders straightened, and for the first time in many months, a bright, joyful smile blossomed on the lips of the old king. One light touch did what neither healers nor sages could do. It returned the very joy of life to the king. The healed king jumped from the throne and tightly embraced his savior. "You have returned life to me, good fellow," he exclaimed, and tears of joy glistened in his eyes. "And I will keep my royal word." He turned to his daughter, the beautiful princess, who stood nearby, not taking admiring eyes off the hero. "My child, here is your groom, the bravest of the brave." The princess blushed and joyfully held out her hand to Hans, for she saw before her not a simple peasant son, but the greatest hero the world had ever known. And they celebrated a wedding in the palace, so magnificent and merry as these walls did not remember. Music thundered, wine flowed, and happiness seemed to overflow every corner of the kingdom. Thus he who went on a journey out of simple compassion found in the end glory, wealth, and the love of the most beautiful of princesses. Thus Hans, a simple peasant son, became heir to the throne. And when the old king passed away peacefully, surrounded by love and care, Hans accepted the crown and ruled wisely and fairly. For he knew the price of both human grief and human joy. He never forgotten those who helped him on the way, neither the kind giantess nor the old pilgrim. And he ruled with compassion in his heart, remembering what it was like to be poor and obscure. And his amazing story became a favorite legend in the kingdom, a legend that even the most terrible monster has its secrets, and that the key to victory is not a sharp sword, but a kind heart capable of finding a friend in the most unexpected place. In his kingdom, the main law became a simple lesson. He who helps others always helps himself in the end. And they lived happily ever after. Once upon a time, there lived a widow. Her little house was small but tidy, standing right beside an old well at the edge of the village. The widow had 2 daughters. One was her own flesh and blood, and the other was a stepdaughter, the child of her late husband's first marriage. Living under one roof, the 2 girls were as different from each other as a clear summer day is from a gloomy autumn evening. The stepdaughter was beautiful of face and kind of heart, and her hands never knew rest. The widow's own daughter, however, was born homely, and on top of that, she was lazy and headstrong. And for this very reason, the widow took a dislike to her stepdaughter. For every time she looked at her, the mother saw everything her own daughter lacked. Such a comparison burned the mother's heart like a glowing coal. The widow's own daughter was named Fanny. She was stout and clumsy, and her face seemed forever frozen in an expression of sour discontent, as if she had just bitten into a green apple. The only work Fanny ever did was turning from one side to the other, and in this exhausting labor, she had achieved unprecedented mastery. She lay on feather beds all day long, eating sweets and barking orders at her stepsister. Fetch this, hand me that, clean up. Her tongue was sharp and wicked, and her heart held nothing but envy and sloth. Yet Fanny adored her mother, and her mother adored her. The widow indulged her every whim, doted on her, and sincerely believed her daughter to be a true treasure worthy of a prince. For a mother's love, alas, is sometimes as blind as a mole at high noon. The stepdaughter was quite different. Her name was Rosa, and the name fitted her like a key fits a lock. She was as lovely as a clear day in May. Her hair shimmered like ripe wheat, and in her kind eyes, the color of the summer sky, shone a quiet, gentle soul. But her beauty knew neither mirrors nor idleness. Rosa was on her feet with the first rays of the sun and toiled until the last star lit up the sky. She stoked the stove and carried water from the well, cooked the meals and washed the linens, spun wool and scrubbed floors. All the dirtiest and hardest work in the house rested on her fragile shoulders. And the more dirt and soot covered her old dress, the brighter the purity of her kind and patient heart seemed to shine. For true light, my child, comes not from silk and velvet, but from a soul that knows no bitterness. Poor Rosa's life was woven from harsh words and heavy labor, and the only reward for her toil was new, even harder work. Her stepmother and stepsister hated her with all their hearts, for the stepdaughter's beauty and kindness were to them what a mirror is to ugliness, a constant and unbearable reminder of what they themselves lacked. They missed no opportunity to humiliate her. They scolded her without cause, gave her tasks that were impossible to complete, and when she completed them anyway, they found new reasons to reproach her. At night, they sent Rosa to sleep on the bare floor by the hearth, right in the ashes and soot, while they luxuriated on soft feather beds. But the girl bore all insults silently, without a single complaint. She never talked back, and always tried to please her cruel family, as if hoping that one day her patience would be rewarded. Winter came. It covered the earth in white snow, fettered the rivers in ice, and in the mornings breathed a cold so bitter that birds froze in mid-flight. But even winter did not soften the wicked stepmother's heart. On the contrary, she devised a new, even crueler task for her stepdaughter. One morning, she thrust a skein of coarse wool and an old spindle into Rosa's hands. "Go to the well and spin there," she ordered. "And don't you dare return until you have spun every last thread." The poor girl did not dare to object. She went out into the frost and sat on the icy edge of the old well. The wind chilled her to the bone. Her fingers went numb, but she set to work. And there she sat in the freezing cold, tears freezing on her cheeks, while the thread she spun seemed woven from the very winter chill and her endless patience. Hour after hour passed, and poor Rosa spun and spun without stopping. She dared not rest for a minute, for she knew her stepmother was watching from the window, but the frost was merciless. Her fingers became completely numb and refused to obey. The coarse wool and the sharp edge of the spindle cut into her chilled skin again and again, and soon her fingers were pricked until they bled. Thus the thread she spun was dyed red, and her own blood, mixing with the wool, became a silent witness to her diligence and her pain. When Rosa looked at her spindle, her heart clenched with fear. It was all stained with crimson spots. "What have I done?" she thought in horror. "Stepmother will be beside herself with rage. She'll say I spoiled the yarn and punish me even more severely." So the girl decided to wash off the blood, She leaned over the dark, icy water of the well. Rosa leaned over the well and carefully lowered the spindle toward the water. But her fingers, stiff with frost, had long since stopped obeying her. And then happened what was bound to happen. The spindle slipped from her weakened hand. She gasped. She lunged forward, trying to catch it in midair, but it was too late. With a quiet, dull splash, so soft yet so deafening, the spindle disappeared into the dark water. In an instant, it was gone, as if it had never been there. Rosa froze, staring into the black, bottomless depth of the well, and terror gripped her heart. In one brief moment, her hours of labor, her pain, and her only hope for peace all vanished into the silent black water, and retrieving it was impossible. Sobbing bitterly, poor Rosa ran to the house. Deep down, she still hoped her stepmother would pity her when she saw her bloodied fingers and lips blue from cold. But she was mistaken. Upon hearing of the loss, the stepmother flew into a rage. Her eyes flared with malicious joy, as if she had been waiting for just such an excuse. "Oh, you good-for-nothing, you slacker," she shrieked. "Not only did you not work, but you drowned my spindle too. Do you have any idea how much that cost?" She grabbed the girl by the shoulder and shoved her out the door, right back into the crackling frost. "You dropped it yourself, you fetch it yourself. And don't show your face to me until you bring the spindle back." With these words, she slammed the door right in her stepdaughter's face. Thus, an accidental slip became a deliberate crime in the stepmother's eyes, and the cold water of the well became a sentence the poor girl had to carry out herself. On stiff legs, Rosa returned to the well. She knew her stepmother wasn't joking. Returning without the spindle was pointless. Freezing at the locked door was certain death. She stood over the black abyss and looked down. The icy water remained silent, keeping its secret. Fear battled with despair in her heart. But what choice did she have? To die slowly in the freezing cold, or to take the risk? And then she made her decision. With trembling hands, she climbed onto the icy rim of the well. She crossed herself. She closed her eyes, and she jumped. She jumped, entrusting her fate not to the cruelty of her stepmother, but to the mercy of the mystery hidden at the bottom of the old well. Darkness and cold swallowed her, and the world vanished. She fell, for a long time or short, and the world went dark for her. Cold, fear, darkness. Everything dissolved into oblivion. But when she opened her eyes, she could not believe them. She was not lying on the cold, muddy bottom of a dark well, as she had expected. She was lying on soft, warm grass, in the middle of a beautiful green meadow. Above her head was not the stone throat of the well, but a boundless blue sky. And it was not winter frost biting her cheeks, but a gentle, warm sun caressing her face. She had jumped into the icy maw of winter and woke up in the warm embrace of eternal summer. Rosa sat up, disbelieving her eyes. She touched the grass. The grass was real. She picked a flower, and it smelled of honey and happiness. She looked at her hands. They were uninjured. "Where am I?" she whispered. "Did I die and go to heaven?" Rosa rose to her feet and looked around. A beautiful meadow stretched out before her in all directions, as far as the eye could see. Thousands of bright flowers, scarlet, gold, azure, covered it like a colorful carpet woven by a skilled craftswoman. Butterflies with wings like precious stones flitted through the warm air, and wondrous birds sang in the branches of flowering trees. It was a land where there was no winter and no sorrow, and its air was woven from the scent of flowers and the carefree singing of birds. And then Rosa understood. She had entered another world, a magical world hidden somewhere deep underground, beneath her village, beneath the old well. Fear left her heart. She was warm, her dress was dry, and her soul was filled not with anxiety, but with quiet, childlike curiosity. What is this place? And what awaits her ahead? But however beautiful this world was, Rosa did not forget why she was there. The spindle, she thought. I must find the spindle, otherwise I can never return home. She looked around and noticed a narrow path ahead that wound through the flowering meadow and disappeared behind a hill. Where it led, the girl did not know, but there was no other way. Perhaps this road will lead me to the spindle, she decided, or to a way out, or to someone who can help me. She straightened her old dress, squared her shoulders, and walked boldly forward. And she walked along this unknown path, led not by fear, but by duty, and her simple diligence became her guiding star in this magical world. Rosa walked on and on along the path, admiring the flowers and listening to the bird song. But suddenly, she stopped dead in her tracks. In the middle of the meadow, where it seemed completely out of place, stood a large village oven. A most ordinary oven, made of brick and clay, with a wide chimney and an open mouth. Light smoke curled from the chimney, and the aroma of fresh baked bread wafted from the oven, making the hungry girl dizzy. And amidst this wild, flowering meadow, she met a piece of her own forsaken world. A simple oven that seemed to be waiting just for her. "Where did an oven come from here?" whispered Rosa, not believing her eyes. But hunger was stronger than surprise. She hadn't eaten in a long time, and the smell was so good. And the girl, not knowing why herself, stepped hopefully toward the oven. No sooner had Rosa approached the oven than a loud, desperate cry rang out from its fiery belly. "Oh, good maiden, take me out quickly." Rosa started in surprise. She peered into the mouth of the oven and saw loaves of brown bread there, golden, fluffy, with crispy crusts. And it was they who were shouting to her in human voices. "We are quite done," pleaded the loaves. "One more minute, just one more minute, and we shall burn. We'll turn into black cinders. Have pity on us, save us." Rosa saw that the bread was indeed about to burn. Its crust was already darkening, and the heat was growing stronger. And the oven, which could have simply fed her, asked her for help instead, testing not her hunger, but her kind heart. And the girl did not hesitate for a second. Rosa did not stop to think for a moment. Her hands, accustomed to labor, knew what to do on their own. She looked around and immediately spotted a large wooden peel that lay thoughtfully by the oven, as if waiting for her. Rosa grabbed the peel, threw open the hot door, and set to work. The heat scorched her face, but she did not retreat. Carefully, gently, so as not to dent or break them, she took the loaves out of the oven one by one. Rosy, fluffy, golden, they lay on the grass, smelling so good that it seemed the whole meadow was filled with the aroma of fresh bread. And her hands, used to hard work, did without thinking what her heart told her to do. They saved the bread from the fire, as they would save any living creature. This was her first nightly deed in this magical world. Selfless help to one who asked. When the last loaf lay on the soft grass, Rosa stepped back and looked at her work. The bread was saved. It lay in even rows, rosy and fragrant, cooling in the gentle breeze. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she did not take a single piece, for it was someone else's bread, and no one had offered it to her. She straightened her dress and prepared to go on. "Thank you, good maiden," cried the rescued loaves after her. "We shall not forget your kindness. Go in peace, and may the road be kind to you." Rosa turned back, smiled a warm smile at them, and continued on her way. She left without taking a crumb, but she carried away something greater, gratitude, which warmed her heart better than any hearth. Rosa walked on, and the path led her deeper into this wondrous land. The meadow gave way to a gentle hill, and on its summit she saw a tree. It was an apple tree. But what an apple tree! Huge and spreading, it stood like the queen of this meadow. And all of it, from the lowest branches to the very top, was laden with apples, large, red, and ripe. There were so many of them that the heavy branches bent down to the very ground under their weight. The tree looked like a tired but happy mother who had raised so many children that she could now barely hold them all in her arms. Branches. "What bounty!" whispered Rosa, stepping closer. "Never in my life have I seen so many apples on one tree." She stopped by the trunk, admiring this miracle of nature. No sooner had Rosa stopped under the spreading crown than the apple tree suddenly spoke to her, and its voice was full of pain and weariness. "Oh, good maiden, shake me quickly." Its branches creaked and groaned like old bones. "My apples have long been ripe," complained the apple tree. "They are so heavy, so heavy. My branches are about to break. I can hold them no longer." Rosa looked closely and saw that the apple tree spoke the truth. Some branches had already cracked under the unbearable burden, and these cracks, like wounds, showed white against the dark bark, and she heard in the creaking of the branches not merely a sound, but a plea for help, a cry of generosity that had become an unbearable burden for the tree. And again, Rosa's heart did not hesitate for a moment. She knew what had to be done. Rosa walked up to the apple tree, wrapped her arms around its rough trunk, and began to shake it with all her might. And then a miracle happened. Apples rained down like a red torrential storm. They fell and fell, large, rosy, fragrant, landing on the grass with soft thuds. For a moment, she became the wind, freeing the tree from its heavy red burden, and the ground around her was covered with a carpet of ripe fruit. Rosa shook and shook until not a single apple, not even the smallest one, remained on the branches. Only then did she step back, breathing heavily, and the apple tree straightened its tired branches with relief. They stretched toward the sun, free, light, and happy. This was her second nightly deed in this magical world, helping nature itself, which was suffering from its own abundance. Having finished the work, Rosa looked at the apples scattered everywhere. How good they looked! How sweetly they smelled! And she hadn't eaten in so long. But she did not take a single apple for herself. Instead, she began to carefully gather them and pile them into a beautiful high mound at the foot of the tree, so they wouldn't get bruised or spoil on the ground. Then she dusted off her hands, straightened her dress, and prepared to go on. "Thank you, good maiden," the apple tree rustled after her, gently swaying its liberated branches. "We shall not forget your help. Go, and may luck be with you." Rosa turned, smiled at the tree, and continued her journey along the path. She walked away again, taking nothing for herself, but carrying in her heart the grateful rustle of leaves, which was sweeter than any apple. The path wound further and further until it finally led Rosa to a small house standing at the very edge of the meadow. And at the end of her long journey across the magical meadow, she found not a castle and not a cave, but a simple, cozy cottage that seemed to have been waiting for her since the beginning of time. It wasn't scary at all. On the contrary, it was very welcoming. Carved shutters decorated its windows, scarlet geraniums bloomed on the windowsills, and a thin wisp of smoke curled from the chimney, smelling of herbs and something delicious. Rosa stopped at the gate. Her heart beat fast. Who lives in this little house? Friend or foe? She gathered her courage, walked up to the door, and knocked timidly. The door opened immediately, as if she were expected. The mistress herself stood on the threshold. An old woman stood there, and at the sight of her, Rosa involuntarily recoiled. The old woman was as ancient as time itself. Her face was furrowed with deep wrinkles, and from her mouth protruded teeth so big and so long that the girl immediately remembered all the scary tales about witches who eat children. Rosa backed away, ready to run. But then the old woman spoke. and her voice was so gentle, so warm and kind, that the fear melted away like snow under the spring sun. "Do not be afraid, my child," she said. "I know who you are and why you have come. My name is Mother Blizzard, and I am the mistress of these lands. Stay with me, and you shall help me with the housework." Her appearance was frightening, but her voice was healing, and the girl realized that in this magical world, one could not judge bread by the heat of the oven, nor a mistress by her teeth. And Rosa, overcoming her initial fear, crossed the threshold of the little house. Mother Blizzard led the girl into the house and sat her by the warm hearth. "The work here is not difficult, my child," she said affectionately. "You will clean the house, cook the food, and keep things in order. But your most important task is to shake my feather bed thoroughly every morning." She led Rosa to a huge down feather bed lying on a wide bed. The feather bed was so fluffy, so snow white, that it looked like a cloud that had descended from the sky. "When you shake it," the old woman continued with a kind smile, "feathers and down will fly from it all over the world. And then, on earth, in your world, soft, fluffy snow will fall. For I am the one who covers the earth for winter with a warm, white blanket." Rosa listened, holding her breath. Thus she learned the great secret of winter, that every snowfall on earth is born from simple, diligent labor in this little house underground. Rosa agreed with joy and set to work that very day, and for the first time in many, many years, her life became truly good. The food on the table was always tasty and plentiful, the bed soft and warm, and most importantly, no one scolded her, reproached her, or beat her. But Rosa did not become lazy from such a life. On the contrary, she worked even harder than before, for now her work was not a duty, but gratitude. She cleaned the house until it shone, cooked delicious dinners, and looked after the household. And she shook the feather bed with such strength and joy, as if with every movement she was covering her distant native land with warm, fluffy snow. White feathers flew in all directions like a real blizzard. And Mother Blizzard was very pleased with her new worker. She had never had such a diligent servant before. Time passed. Perhaps a whole winter went by, or perhaps more. In this magical world, days flowed unnoticed, like water in a brook. Rosa lived in contentment and peace. She had everything she could dream of: hearty food, a warm shelter, a kind mistress. And yet, more and more often, she would freeze by the window, looking somewhere into the distance. She remembered her village, the old well, the snow-covered fields. She remembered even her stepmother and Fanny. Cruel as they were, that was her world, her home. Paradise underground could not replace her native land, however cold and inhospitable, and her heart began to ache for home. She became sad and thoughtful, and kind Mother Blizzard noticed this. One morning, Rosa gathered her courage and approached her kind mistress. "Mother Blizzard," she said quietly, "I am grateful to you for everything you have done for me, but I can no longer stay. My heart calls me home." The old woman looked at her with a long, wise gaze and smiled. "I know, my child," she answered gently. "I have seen your longing for a long time. You have served me well and honestly, and I am glad that you want to return to your people. I will see you up myself." She let her best worker go with a light heart, for she knew that honest labor must be rewarded, and longing for home must be satisfied. Mother Blizzard took Rosa by the hand and led her to the exit of her magical world. Mother Blizzard led Rosa to huge gates standing in the middle of the flowering meadow. These gates were as tall as trees and shone in the sunlight as if they were made of light itself. "Pass under them, my child," said the old woman. "This is the reward for your diligence and your kind heart." Rosa timidly stepped under the high arch, and then a miracle happened. From above, from the very top of the gates, a rain poured down on her, but not of water, but of gold. Streams of liquid, shining gold poured onto her head, onto her shoulders, enveloping her from head to toe in a warm, dazzling radiance. And she stood under this warm, shining downpour, and the gold covered her not as a burden of wealth, but as a sign of her pure, precious soul. When she stepped out from under the gates, her entire simple dress, her wheat-colored hair, her skin, everything sparkled and shimmered with pure gold. She shone like a little sun. "And here is your spindle," said Mother Blizzard, handing her the lost item. Rosa gasped. The spindle had become golden too. She turned to thank the kind old woman, but the gates had already closed, and the girl suddenly found herself on the ground, by her native well, as if there had never been any magical world. Shining like a little sun, she walked toward the house. Her stepmother and Fanny were sitting by the window when suddenly the old rooster on the fence shook himself, flapped his wings, and crowed to the whole village. "Cock-a-doodle-doo! Our golden girl is back with you." The stepmother and sister ran out onto the porch and froze, mouths gaping. She had left this house in tears and soot and returned in the radiance of pure gold. And even the silly rooster understood that before him was not a dirty cinder girl, but a true queen. The stepmother and Fanny could not take their eyes off the shining stepdaughter. Envy burned their hearts like red-hot iron. "Darling, our dear one," they sang in false voices, showering her with affection. "Where have you been? Where did you get this wonderful gold?" And kind Rosa, harboring no grudges, honestly told them everything about the well, the magical meadow, the stove with the bread, the apple tree, and her service to Mother Blizzard. They looked at her gold, but saw not a reward for labor, but merely easy prey. And a plan immediately matured in their hearts on how to get the same treasure without paying for it with a single drop of sweat. My Fanny will go there tomorrow, decided the stepmother. Surely she deserves gold far more than this dirty girl. The very next morning, Fanny set off for riches. She deliberately stained a spindle with blood, threw it into the well, and dreaming of gold, jumped in after it. She too woke up in the beautiful meadow and walked along the familiar path. Soon she heard a desperate cry from the oven. "Oh, good maiden, take us out. We will burn." "As if," snorted Fanny. "I'm not going to get my hands dirty for you. Jump out yourselves if you need to." And she walked on. Then the apple tree groaned. "Oh, good maiden, shake me. My branches are breaking." "Not likely." The lazy girl waved it off. "An apple might fall on my head and ruin my hairdo. Fall down yourselves." She walked along the road of good deeds, but her heart was deaf to the requests of others, and she left behind not gratitude, but only burnt bread and broken branches. Thus she passed by without doing a single good deed. Fanny appeared before Mother Blizzard without fear. After all, her sister had told her the old woman was kind, and immediately asked for a job. On the first day, she actually tried. The thought of gold gave her strength, and she even shook the feather bed, though not very diligently. But on the second day, laziness took over. Fanny got up late, didn't clean the house, and only patted the feather bed lightly with her palm. Not a single snowflake fell on earth that day. On the third day, she didn't get out of bed at all. "Oh, I'm so tired," she groaned, though she had done nothing. Let the feather bed shake itself. She came for the gold, but was not ready to pay for it with the only coin accepted here: honest work. And Mother Blizzard saw everything. She remained silent, but her eyes grew colder. Mother Blizzard tired of this quickly. On the third day, she walked up to the bed where the lazy girl was lounging and said strictly, "Enough. Your service is ended." Fanny, however, was only delighted. She was sure she had already earned her portion of gold, maybe even double. "Well then, lead me to the gates, old woman," she declared brazenly, not even thanking the mistress. "I've stayed here too long anyway. Give me my gold, and plenty of it." Mother Blizzard answered nothing. Her face was calm and cold, like a winter dawn. And Mother Blizzard, whose heart was kind but just, decided it was time to give this worker the payment she truly deserved. She silently took the lazy girl by the hand and led her to the exit. Fanny, for her part, was just glad it was all over so quickly. She was sick of working, and the gold, here it was, so close. She yanked her hand away from the old woman and ran impatiently toward the great gates. "Now I'll return home, covered in gold," she dreamed as she ran. "No, I'll be even richer than that fool Rosa." I'll buy silk dresses, velvet shoes, and then I'll laugh at my dirty sister." She stood right under the high arch of the gates, threw her head back, and spread her arms, greedily awaiting her golden rain. She stood with arms open for gold, not knowing that justice had prepared a very different rain for her, black and sticky. Mother Blizzard leisurely approached the gates and stood nearby. "Here is the payment for your service," she pronounced coldly. Fanny squeezed her eyes shut in anticipation. Now the gold will pour. And then a crash came from above. A torrent crashed down on her, but not golden, but black. Not shining, but sticky. A huge kettle of hot, thick pitch overturned onto her head. "Ah!" shrieked Fanny in horror and disgust. The pitch flowed down her face, flooded her eyes and mouth, glued her hair into hideous icicles, and soaked her dress through and through. She tried to shake it off, tear it off, scrape it away, but the pitch only smeared, sticking even faster. Thus, for her laziness and the dirt in her soul, she received dirt on her body as a reward, and this black, sticky pitch became the eternal mark of her negligent nature. The gates slammed shut behind her, and Fanny found herself by her native well, covered from head to toe in black, sticky pitch. She had gone for gold, but returned in disgrace, and her reward, black and sticky, was visible to everyone from afar. Sobbing and smearing the pitch over her face, she trudged toward the house. The stepmother, hearing the noise, ran out to meet her and recoiled in horror, not recognizing her own daughter. And the old rooster on the fence shook himself, flapped his wings, and crowed to the whole village. "Cock-a-doodle-doo, our filthy girl is back with you." And the neighbors, every single one of them, poured out of their houses to look at this spectacle. They pointed their fingers at her and laughed so hard they could be heard at the other end of the village. And so they remained living, the stepmother and her own daughter, in filth and malice. The black pitch, which was the eternal mark of Fanny's laziness, never washed off, no matter how much they rubbed and scrubbed. But the industrious Rosa soon met a handsome prince, and he fell in love with her, not for the gold on her dress, but for her golden heart, which shone brighter than any riches. They held a wedding and lived happily ever after, and their story became a lesson for all children in the world. For in Mother Blizzard's world, just as in ours, everyone eventually gets what they deserve. Some get the radiance of gold, and some get the eternal stamp of their own laziness. And that is the end of the tale, and whoever listened is doing well. In a certain kingdom, in a certain state, lived an old king, a ruler wise and just, loved by all his people. For many years, his kingdom flourished under kind and merciful rule. But one day, a shadow fell upon the happy land. For its heart, the good king began to beat quieter and quieter. An unknown ailment struck the sovereign. Life was leaving him as water leaves a dried-up brook. He grew weaker every day, fading like a candle in a cold wind. The best healers of the kingdom gathered at his bedside, but only threw up their hands in powerlessness. Neither healing brews nor rare potions could stop the illness, and great sorrow enveloped the land. In every house, in every hut, people bowed their heads in prayer, asking the heavens to save the life of their good king. 3 of his sons gathered at the bedside of the dying king. The 2 eldest stood at a distance, stately, strong, and handsome, like young oaks. But in their eyes, cold and calculating, there was no fatherly grief. They whispered about state affairs, about lands and the treasury, and sometimes their glances met with a silent question: who will get the crown? The youngest prince was different. Not so mighty, not so formidable. He seemed a shadow of his brothers, but his eyes were full of tears and sincere torment. He did not step away from his father's headboard a single step, sometimes adjusting the pillow, sometimes bringing water to parched lips, sometimes simply holding the weakening hand in his own. 2 looked at the fading father and saw weakening power, and only 1 looked at him and saw simply a father, the one he feared losing more than anything in the world. When the last healer lowered his hands in despair, a gray-haired wanderer knocked at the palace gates. A tattered cloak covered his shoulders, and his eyes were ancient as time itself. He was brought to the royal bed, and the old man spoke. There is one remedy. Far in the east, beyond 7 mountains and 7 dense forests, stands an enchanted castle. In the courtyard of that castle, a miraculous spring gushes from under the earth, the water of life. 1 sip of it heals any ailment, returns youth to an old man, and even raises the dead from the grave. The old man fell silent, and his voice became heavy. But the path there is full of deadly dangers. Many went to look for the spring. Almost no one returned back. His words sounded in the mournful silence, not as medical advice, but as an ancient spell, promising either miraculous salvation or certain death. Hearing the words of the wanderer, the dying king raised himself on the bed. In his fading eyes, a spark of hope flashed. "Call my sons," he whispered. 3 princes bowed before their father, and the king spoke, gathering his last strength. "My children, I ask you to go in search of the water of life. The one of you who brings me the miraculous water and saves me from death will inherit my kingdom." The words were still ringing in the air, and in the eyes of the older brothers, a greedy fire had already flashed. They glanced at each other, and each thought one thing: the crown will be mine. Not the father, not his life, only the golden crown stood before their mind's eye. The youngest son sank to his knees and kissed his father's hand. In his heart beat only one thought: to be in time to save not to let the loved one fade away. Thus the last will of the king became for two a race for power, and only for one a race for life. No sooner had the father's words died away than the eldest prince was already demanding the best steed from the royal stable. "The crown will be mine," he thought, spurring the horse. "I will find the water first, and those two will be left with nothing." He raced through the dense forest, and his thoughts were occupied not with his sick father, but with the golden crown and the throne. Suddenly, a small, gray, bearded dwarf walked out onto the narrow path. The little old man bowed politely and asked, "Where are you heading, good fellow? Why are you rushing so?" The prince looked down at him contemptuously, and his face was distorted with anger. "None of your business, shorty. Get out of the way before my horse tramples you." He rudely pushed the dwarf aside and raced on without looking back. The eldest brother rode so fast as if death itself were chasing him. He did not suspect that he was racing straight into a trap dug by his own pride. The little dwarf looked after the rude rider for a long time. His eyes darkened, and he whispered a quiet spell, words ancient as the mountains themselves. The prince, meanwhile, rode into a narrow mountain gorge. Stone walls rose on both sides, almost blocking the sky. And suddenly, he felt something was wrong. The rocks trembled and began to move. Slowly, inevitably, the walls of the gorge began to shift. The prince spurred his horse, but it was too late. The stone vise squeezed tighter and tighter, until finally he was clamped so firmly that he could not move, neither hand nor foot. Thus the mountains, which he insulted in the person of their little master, closed their stone embrace over the proud man, and he remained there, a prisoner of his own arrogance, doomed to wait until someone set him free. Days passed, and the eldest brother did not return. The middle prince secretly rejoiced. One rival less. He ordered his horse saddled and set off on a journey full of ambitious dreams. Brother must have perished on the road, he thought, grinning. Well, all the better. The crown will go to me alone. He rode along the same road as the eldest brother, not knowing that he was following him, not only on the path, but also on the way of stupidity and pride. In the same dense forest, on the same narrow path, the familiar gray-bearded dwarf appeared before him. The little old man bowed politely. "Where are you heading, good fellow? Where are you hurrying?" The middle brother looked him over with a contemptuous gaze and laughed. "What business is it of yours, forest root? Do you think I will share secrets with someone like you? Get out of the way." And he raced past, covering the little dwarf with dust from under the hooves. The dwarf looked after the second boar for a long time. His face was sad, but his hand firmly traced the same magic sign in the air. The middle brother, suspecting nothing, rode into the narrow mountain gorge, and again the rocks trembled, awakening from an ancient sleep. The stone walls closed around him like the jaws of a huge beast. When the dust settled, the middle prince found himself in a trap, and nearby, clamped in the same stone vice, stood his eldest brother. "You?" both exclaimed in one voice. And long hours dragged on. The brothers, unable to move, began to curse each other angrily, blaming each other, fate, the accursed forest, anyone but themselves. Thus the gorge collected its collection of proud men. Two brothers who dreamed of dividing the kingdom now shared only a cramped stone dungeon. Time passed, and neither of the brothers returned. Then the youngest prince came to the bedside of his dying father and sank to his knees. "Let me go, father," he asked quietly. "Let me find the water of life." The king was silent for a long time. The youngest son was his last hope and last joy. But there was no other way, and he blessed him on the journey with a heavy heart. The prince demanded neither a retinue nor bags of gold. He saddled his faithful horse, took only a flask and a crust of bread, and bent over his father in a farewell kiss. "I will return," he whispered. "I promise you." And he rode out of the palace gates, not as an heir demanding his own, but as a son ready to give everything for one more beat of his father's heart. The youngest prince rode through the same dense forest, and on the same narrow path the small gray-bearded dwarf appeared before him. The little old man bowed and asked, "Where are you heading, good fellow? Why are you so sad?" The prince pulled the reins, stopped the horse, and dismounted. He bowed to the dwarf in return, low and respectfully as to an equal. "Hello, grandfather," he answered. "I am going to seek the water of life. My father, the good king, is dying of a terrible illness. Not a single healer could help him. They say only a miraculous spring in an enchanted castle can save him." The prince's voice trembled, and he added quietly, "I must be in time. He is everything I have." And he spoke with the little old man, not as with a hindrance on his path, but as with the first person he met to whom he could tell of his sorrow. And this simple respect changed everything. The dwarf's eyes warmed, and he smiled into his gray beard. "I see you are not like your brothers," he said. "Those two treated me rudely, and now stand in stone captivity, clamped by mountains. But for your kind heart, I will help you." The dwarf took out from his bosom a small loaf of bread and an iron rod. "Take these gifts. This bread is magic. No matter how much you break off, it will never end. At the gates of the enchanted castle, two hungry lions keep watch. Feed them to their fill, and they will let you pass. And with the iron rod, strike the gates 3 times, and they will open." The little old man pointed to the east. "Ride straight, without turning anywhere. Beyond the 7th mountain, you will see the castle. In its courtyard, a spring beats from the earth. This is the water of life." The prince bowed low. "Thank you, grandfather." Thus simple respect turned into magic, and an honest answer into a map leading to the goal. The prince was already about to set off when the dwarf raised his hand and spoke strictly. "Wait. Listen to the most important thing." His voice became heavy and serious. "That castle is enchanted, and ancient magic holds it firmly in its embrace. You must collect water from the spring and leave the castle before the clock on the main tower strikes midnight." The dwarf looked intently into the prince's eyes. "Remember, if you linger even for a minute, the iron gates will slam shut forever, and you will remain there for eternity, together with all who already sleep in that castle, an enchanted sleep." The prince nodded firmly. "I will hurry, grandfather, I promise." And this last warning sounded like the first strike of the clock, the beginning of the inexorable countdown of time allotted to the prince for his feat. Long or short, but the prince reached the enchanted castle. Gloomy towers rose above the dense forest, overgrown with wild blackthorn. Silence stood around, as in a grave, neither a bird nor a breeze. At the huge iron gates, bound with rusty chains, lay two giant lions. Sensing a stranger, the beasts awoke, and a furious roar shook the air. But the prince did not flinch. He remembered the words of the good dwarf, took out the magic loaf, and threw it to the lions. The hungry beasts forgot about their fury and pounced on the bread. They ate, and the loaf did not end. Finally, having eaten their fill, the lions lay down at the prince's feet and purred like tame kittens, opening the way to the gates. Thus kindness, given in the form of bread, defeated fury, and the guardians of death became guides to life. The prince walked past the pacified lions and stopped before the mass of the iron gates. Rust covered their ancient hinges, and the heavy bolts seemed impregnable. He took out the iron rod, the gift of the good dwarf, and struck the gates 3 times. Strike, strike, strike. A deafening grinding sound tore the dead silence. The earth shuddered underfoot. The rusty bolts moved back by themselves with a groan, and the heavy leaves slowly crawled apart, as if awakening from a centuries-old sleep. The prince stepped inside, and the gates immediately slammed shut behind his back with a hollow iron clang. He found himself in the empty courtyard of the castle. The silence here was so thick that it seemed one could touch it with a hand. The gates that would not have yielded to the battering ram of an entire army opened before a simple iron rod. For in this castle, the laws of magic were stronger than the laws of war. The prince entered the halls of the castle and froze in amazement. Everything around was immersed in a deep, magic sleep. Guards froze by the walls, leaning against the stonework, with spears in their hands and closed eyes. In the kitchen, cooks froze by the hearths, with ladles raised over cauldrons. In the great hall court, ladies and gentlemen turned to stone in the middle of a dance, hands raised, mouths half open in unfinished words. Even flies hung in the air, not having completed their flight. The fire in the fireplace did not burn, it slept, preserving the shape of frozen tongues of flame, giving neither light nor heat. Time here stopped many years ago. The prince walked through these frozen scenes like a ghost, and his steps echoed hollowly in the dead silence. The only sound in a huge museum of interrupted life. He hurried, remembering midnight, but his eyes involuntarily slid over the faces of the sleepers, forever frozen in a long-forgotten moment. Passing through the halls, the prince reached the main chamber of the castle, and his heart stood still. On a high throne, amidst velvet and gold, slept a beautiful princess. The magic sleep had no power over her beauty. Golden hair streamed over her shoulders, and a shadow of a smile froze on her lips, as if she were dreaming of something wonderful. The prince forgot about everything, about his dying father, and about the water of life, and about time. He approached the throne, and unable to resist, leaned over and kissed her. At that same moment, the princess opened her eyes, clear as the spring sky. She saw the prince, and her face lit up with joy. "I waited for you," she whispered. "In my dreams, I saw a beautiful prince would come and free me. You are my savior." Thus his kiss, born not of calculation, but of pure admiration, became the key that opened the doors of her 100-year dungeon of sleep. The princess rose from the throne and took the prince by the hand. "Listen to me," she said. "You woke me, but the castle will awaken only when you leave its walls. The ancient magic will not leave immediately." She looked into his eyes. "I will wait for you exactly 1 year. In a year, the gates of this castle will open for you again. If you return, we will play a wedding, and you will become king of these lands. Do you promise to return?" "I swear," answered the prince. Then the princess took from her belt a royal sword with a handle of ivory and a ring with the family crest. "Take these. Let them be a pledge of my fidelity and proof of your feat." The prince accepted the gifts and pressed them to his heart. Thus, in 1 short hour, he found both the goal of his path and the promise of a new, even greater destiny that awaited him behind the walls of the enchanted castle. The princess took him by the hand and led him into the inner courtyard of the castle. There, in the middle of an overgrown garden, where wild roses entwined forgotten statues, a small spring beat from under an ancient, mossy stone. The water in it was not simply clear, it glowed from within with a soft, pearly light, as if a moonbeam had dissolved in it. "Here it is," quietly said the princess, "the water of life." The prince sank to his knees before the spring. His hands trembled when he took out the flask. With reverence, as for the greatest shrine, he plunged it into the glowing stream and filled it to the very brim. Now the salvation of his father was in his hands. "Thank you," he whispered to the princess, "for everything." Thus he filled his flask not simply with water, but with life itself, pure and radiant, capable of defeating any shadow and any death. The flask with the precious water was securely hidden in his bosom. The prince said goodbye to the princess and headed for the gates. But his legs felt like lead. The long journey, trials, and excitement had taken all his strength. "Rest before the road," suggested the princess, He shook his head, remembering the dwarf's words about midnight. But passing by one of the rooms, he saw a luxurious bed under a velvet canopy. Soft pillows seemed to beckon him. Just for a minute, he thought. I will only sit down, gather my strength. He sank onto the edge of the bed, his eyelids closed by themselves. And before he could understand what was happening, deep sleep swallowed him. At that moment, when he allowed himself to forget about time, time inexorable and magical began its last fatal countdown. Bong, bong, bong. The deafening striking of the clock tore the silence. The prince jumped up as if stung. Midnight. He had overslept. He rushed to run, along corridors, downstairs. His heart pounded in his chest. His feet barely touched the stone slabs. Behind his back, the castle was coming to life. Candles flared, voices rang out. The clatter of weapons of the awakening guard was heard. But he did not look back. Bong, bong. He rushed out into the courtyard, and his heart sank. The huge iron gates were already crawling towards each other, closing. Bong, bong. Gathering his last strength, the prince lunged forward. A desperate jump, and he slipped into the narrowing gap. Bong! The gates slammed shut with a deafening crash, taking a piece of the heel from his boot. He lay on the ground, gasping, pressing the flask with the water of life to his chest. He made it. At the last second, but he made it. The prince set off on the return journey. In the same forest, he again met the good dwarf and told him about everything, about the sleeping castle, about the beautiful princess, about the water of life. The dwarf listened to him and shook his head. Your kind heart saved you, but it can also ruin you. At my request, the mountains released your brothers. Beware, they will soon meet you on the way. And indeed, the prince had not ridden a mile when he saw two horsemen on the road. These were his brothers, pitiful, exhausted, with lowered heads. Brother, they exclaimed, how we suffered in stone captivity. How glad we are that you found the water of life. The prince looked at their bowed heads and heard words of repentance, not knowing that under the mask of humility lurked the same black envy, only temporarily hidden. The brothers rode alongside, and their faces were full of sadness. During the time of our captivity, they sighed. Our lands have fallen into decay. Enemies have ravaged the borders. Subjects are starving. We do not know what to do. The heart of the youngest prince clenched with compassion. He took out the sword with the ivory handle, the gift of the princess. Take this. This magic sword will help you restore order in your lands. And here is bread that will feed entire armies. The brothers accepted the gifts with tears of gratitude, swearing eternal loyalty. But from behind the trees, the dwarf watched them. He stepped out onto the road and quietly said to the prince, beware of them. Their hearts are black as night. The prince only smiled. These are my brothers. Grandfather, he gave them the weapons of victory. not suspecting that the first person this magic sword would strike would be himself. The three brothers continued the journey together. By day, the elders asked the youngest about his adventures, admired his bravery, called him a hero. But in their eyes, when he turned away, an unkind fire flashed. At night, when the fire had burned down and the youngest prince fell into a sound sleep, the brothers exchanged glances. The hour had come. Silently, like snakes, they crawled up to the sleeper. The eldest carefully pulled the flask from his bosom. The middle one took out another with bitter sea water collected on the way. They poured the precious water of life into their vessel, and into his flask they poured salty, dead water. All this they did in silence. Only evil sneers twisted their faces in the light of the dying embers. Thus, while he slept, dreaming of his saved father and beautiful bride, they stole from him not just water, but his honor, his glory, and his future. In the morning, the three brothers set off. The youngest prince beamed with happiness. Soon he would see his father. Soon he would give him the healing water. Soon everything would end well. He spurred his horse, hurrying to his native palace, and behind his back rode his brothers, exchanging glances and hiding evil sneers in the shadow of the road dust. Then the towers of the capital appeared. The people poured into the streets, greeting the three princes with joyful shouts. None of them knew who the real hero was. No one saw the switch. No one noticed the wolfish looks of the older brothers. The youngest prince hurried home as a savior, not knowing that his executioners were riding behind his back. He dreamed of triumph, and disgrace was already walking to meet him. The palace gates swung open, ready to receive the hero, or the victim. The youngest prince ran up the steps and burst into his father's chambers. "Father," he exclaimed, falling to his knees by the bed, "I have brought you the water of life. Drink quickly." He brought the flask to the lips of the dying king. He, gathering his last strength, took a sip, and his face distorted. Bitter, salty water burned his parched lips. The king wheezed, coughed, and in fury threw the flask away. The precious liquid, no dead seawater, spilled across the stone floor. "You," he wheezed, gasping, "you wanted to poison me, your own son." The illness from the shock struck with new force. The king fell onto the pillows, gasping for air. The prince froze in horror. He understood nothing. The world was collapsing around him. Thus the hope which he carried through forests and mountains on his father's lips turned into poison. And he, the savior, in one moment became a parricide. At that moment the doors flew open, and the older brothers entered the chambers. Their faces were full of feigned horror. "Father," exclaimed the eldest, "what has he done to you? We always knew," picked up the middle one, "that he envies us and wants to get the crown by deceit." They bowed before the king, and with a bow held out their flask to him. "Here, father, is the real water of life. It was obtained by us, your faithful sons." The king looked at the flask with mistrust, but still took a sip. And a miracle happened. As soon as the life-giving moisture touched his lips, strength poured back into his exhausted body. Paleness left his face, his eyes cleared, his back straightened. "My children," exclaimed the healed king, embracing his elder sons, "my saviors." Thus the stolen miracle healed the king's body, but finally poisoned his soul, forcing him to believe the blackest lie. The healed king rose from his bed, and his eyes blazed with terrible anger. "Traitor!" thundered his voice. "Parricide!" "Father, I swear to you." The youngest prince fell to his knees, reaching out his hands to his father. "Silence! I do not wish to hear your lies." The king summoned the chief of the secret guard and pointed to his son. "Take him, lead him into the deepest forest thicket, and execute him there. Let there be no spirit of him in my kingdom, but do it secretly." "I do not want to disgrace our family," father exclaimed. The prince for the last time, but the king turned away. The guards seized him and dragged him away. The doors slammed shut behind his back. Thus he who went on a journey to save his father from death was sentenced by this very father to death. The faithful huntsman led the prince into the deep forest thicket. He walked in silence, and his hand lay on the hilt of his sword. But when they stopped in a clearing, the huntsman suddenly lowered his weapon. Tears flowed down his cheeks. "I cannot do this, Your Highness," he whispered. "You helped my family when we were starving. You treated my sick son. My hand will not rise against you." He stepped back. "Run. Run far away, and do not return until the king's anger subsides." The prince silently hugged the old servant and disappeared into the thicket. The huntsman killed a wild deer and brought its heart to the palace. The king believed that the order had been carried out. Thus the kindness which the prince once sowed as a simple seed sprouted in the most needful hour and became a shield against royal wrath. The youngest prince, deprived of name and home, wandered through distant forests like a shadow of his former self. He built a hut in the deep thicket, learned to set snares and build a fire without smoke so as not to attract royal huntsmen. From a prince, he turned into a simple hunter, lonely and nameless. Bitterness burned his heart. The betrayal of his brothers, the blind anger of his father, all this lay like a stone on his soul. Sometimes at night, he woke up clenching his fists from impotent resentment. But one thought warmed him in the darkest hours, the thought of the beautiful princess. He remembered her eyes, her voice, her promise. He counted the days. He scratched notches on the bark of an old oak and waited for the year to pass. He lost a kingdom, but kept an oath in his heart. And this oath became his new homeland and his new crown. Exactly 1 year passed. A cortege of unprecedented beauty rode up to the capital of the kingdom. Snow-white horses and golden harness, carriages decorated with precious stones, and hundreds of servants in silk clothes. It was she, the saved princess. Her kingdom had awakened from sleep, and now she came for her groom, just as she promised. The princess ordered the servants to spread a cloth of pure gold on the road leading to the palace, from the city gates to the very porch. Then she summoned her messengers. "Ride to the king. Say the bride is coming for her savior. Let the groom ride out to meet me along this golden road. He who rides straight along it is the real one, and he who turns aside or is afraid is an impostor, and I will not accept him." She came not simply as a bride, but as a judge. And the road she spread was not a path to a wedding, but a path to the truth. Hearing about the beautiful bride, the older brothers argued about which of them would go first. "It was I who saved the princess," shouted the eldest. "No," I objected, the middle one. Finally, the eldest, as the firstborn, demanded his right. He dressed in luxurious clothes, got on the best horse, and rode out to the city gates. But seeing the golden road sparkling in the sun, he stopped. What a pity, he thought, to spoil such beauty with hooves. It is a pity. I will take it for myself after the wedding. He turned and rode on the side, on ordinary ground. The princess met him with a cold look. "You are not my savior. Go away." The middle brother, learning of the failure, rushed after him. But his greedy heart also could not stand it. He too turned off the golden path, and also received a refusal. Thus the gold which they craved all their lives became a trap for them. Selfish hearts did not allow them to pass along the road intended only for a true hero. The princess frowned and turned to the old king. "Tell me, sire, do you not have a third son?" The king turned pale. Shame and fear fettered his tongue. How to confess that he ordered the execution of the one who was possibly the true savior? No, he lied. Only two. But then a man stepped out of the crowd of courtiers and fell to his knees before the princess. It was the old huntsman. "Forgive me, your majesty," he exclaimed. "I can no longer be silent. There is a third son. He is alive. He was slandered, and the king ordered me to execute him. But I disobeyed. My hand did not rise against the innocent. He is hiding in the forests." The princess flushed. Anger and hope simultaneously lit up her face. Thus the truth which the king tried to bury in the forest, together with his son, suddenly sprouted from the heart of a simple huntsman and blossomed before the eyes of the entire court. The princess ordered the youngest prince to be found immediately. The king, tormented by remorse, sent messengers to all ends of his kingdom. He was found in a deep forest thicket in a poor hut, dressed in simple hunting clothes. He listened to the messengers in silence, and only his eyes flashed with the fire of hope. When he rode up to the city gates and saw the golden road, he did not stop for a moment. His horse stepped onto the sparkling fabric confidently and firmly, and the prince rode straight to the palace, not turning a single step. He entered the throne room, and everyone gasped. Simple clothes could not hide the royal bearing hardened in trials. He returned to the house from which he was banished, not as a forgiven criminal, but as a true king whose road was paved with the gold of his merits. The youngest prince stopped in the middle of the throne room. He did not dare to raise his eyes to his father. The wound of the unjust sentence was too fresh. But the princess herself walked up to him. Her face shone with joy. "This is he," she said, addressing the entire court. "My savior, the one who awakened me from 100-year sleep." She took his hand and raised it up. On the prince's finger sparkled the ring with her family crest, the very one she gave him in the enchanted castle. And he silently took out from his belt the sword with the ivory handle and held it out to her. A murmur of amazement rolled through the hall. All doubts dissipated like morning fog. Two objects, the ring, the symbol of a promise, and the sword, the symbol of a feat, spoke louder than any words and told the true story. The older brothers, seeing that their lie was revealed, turned pale with horror. While all eyes were fixed on the youngest prince, they secretly slipped out of the hall. That same night, they boarded a ship and sailed across the sea. No one ever saw them again. And the old king slowly descended from the throne. Tears flowed down his wrinkled cheeks. He approached his youngest son and suddenly sank to his knees before him. "Forgive me," he whispered. "Forgive an old fool for blindness and injustice." The youngest prince looked at the gray head of his father, bowed before him. His heart knew no malice. He gently raised the king from his knees and hugged him tightly. "I forgive you, father." At that moment, he performed his main feat. He gave his father not only the water of life, but also the water of forgiveness, which healed his soul. The wedding was played for 7 days and 7 nights. The tables groaned with food. The music did not cease until dawn, and all the people rejoiced at the happiness of their good prince. The youngest son remained with his father and took care of him until the last hour. And when the old king peacefully closed his eyes, the prince ascended the throne and became a wise, just ruler of 2 united kingdoms. For on his long and difficult path, he learned not only the price of miracles and the bitterness of betrayal, but also the great power of forgiveness and the true value of a kind heart. Thus ended this story, proving that the path to the crown lies not through force and cunning, but through honesty, kindness, and fidelity to one's word.